meeting of the Lacey Land Use and Environment Committee. I'm Councilmember Carolyn Cox, and we have a quorum today with council members Robin Vasquez and Lenny Greenstein here today. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda as published.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Okay, motion carries unanimously. Our first agenda item is amendments to the Lacey Municipal Code 2.3 hearing examiner. And looks like we've got Grant with us. Ready to roll, Grant?
I am ready to roll. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
So last year, the council considered amendments to the hearing examiner code and other code provisions to primarily to transfer the council out of the quasi-judicial permit process. That ordinance was voted down, but when we were looking at the hearing examiner code in preparation for that process, we noted a lot of code citations that were really out of date and needed to be updated. So we're here today to ask the Land Use Committee to consider forwarding those housekeeping amendment changes to the full council for consideration. And just by way of example, the initial, I think you may recall, during the previous consideration, our hearing examiner ordinance was adopted in 1979. At that time, the city of Lacey didn't have its own planning staff. Thurston Regional Planning Council acted as current and long-range planners for all the cities in the county. So there's a reference in the code to our hearing examiner also serving as the hearing examiner for Olympia, Tumwater, and Thurston County, which hasn't been the case for quite a while. So a lot of things like that. There's a lot of outdated code references, so we'd like to revise. There's a broad code and ordinance citations that need to be updated to specific Lacey Municipal Code citations. We want to update the hearing examiner appointment process a little bit and have that appointment done by the mayor and then confirmed by city council. And of course, deleting reference to the joint hearing examiner. Remove language related to the actual application process. Those are established in our development guidelines and are updated there. So these, the ones in the hearing examiner section, are redundant and conflicting. Want to update the language related to notices of decision to reflect the fact that we have options other than the U.S. mail at this point in our lifetimes, and remove outdated provisions related to coordinating with the Planning Commission. At one time, they had a hand in the permitting process, and there was a need to coordinate between those two offices. That's no longer the case. So along with our kind of outdated code, we also have a contract with our hearing examiner that goes back to 1997. It's currently Sound Law Center, and at the time it was Driscoll and Hunter. The last time we updated that PSA was 2007. So, and I've attached the draft changes that we would propose to the staff report. Again, there's no substantive changes. It's just really bringing the code up to date. And we'd ask for your consensus to move forward to the full council. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So I would move to forward to the full council for consideration the amendments to LMC 2.30 Land Use Hearings Examiner.
Second. Grant, I did have a question. I see that we're lining out text that says examiner shall not hold elective office. I'm assuming that's still the case, right? That a hearing examiner should not also be an elected official in a jurisdiction over which
Yep.
they have any,
It would be an
Influence.
automatic conflict of interest. Yeah.
right? Okay, so we don't need it in the code, but we all know that's not.
Yeah.
We can't
Correct.
have that. Yes.
Correct. And we've also kind of formalized the pro tem examiner as well for those cases when a conflict of interest or appearance of fairness issue is offered up. So there's
Arises.
thank you.
There we go.
A more clear way to appoint a pro tem.
Got it.
All righty. Any other discussion?
One other thing I just would like to add to you with reference to the planning commission, because there's also standard in our contracts and there was some language in the previous ordinance about hearing examiner providing training, but it shouldn't be, that part of a performance should not be in an ordinance.
Yeah.
That's something we would look at to put in a contract with the hearing examiner, that they also will provide not only staff training,
Yep.
but also touch bases with council on an annual basis to provide information or a connection like we've had done sometimes in the past. And then of course, with this, going forward potentially to council with these administrative amendments to the ordinance that got lost in the last time we were before council, we'll probably schedule a brief touch base at a work session just to make sure everybody's aware before the council meeting what the scope of this is and if they want to talk about other issues as well.
All righty. That sounds good. Any last comments? If not, are you ready to vote? Okay, all in favor of approving the motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion unanimously carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Grant. And now we have Sarah Schelling, who's going to give us a legislative update on all things land use.
No. You got the share screen right there, pop up right below your window.
Green. There we go. Thank you.
There, that share. Might need a
Now we
mouse.
can see it.
Am I doing this? There we
There we
go. Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you. So yes, I'm here to give a brief update of the 2023 past legislation from this past session related to land use. So the focus in regards to land use legislation that passed this past session really was in regards to three different areas. Whoops. And those three, I'll talk briefly about each of the bills related to these three areas. The first one, and probably the biggest focus, was on increasing the availability and affordability of housing. The second item was in relationship to reducing permitting barriers, which is thought then to increase the availability and affordability of housing because you get your permits faster. And then the third item was in regards to climate change, sustainability, and resiliency. So first we're going to talk about House Bill 1110, and you've probably all heard about this bill. This is the middle housing bill. And the intent of this bill was really to create opportunity for infill construction to accommodate middle housing. We're in pretty good shape in regards to this bill. The low density residential lot consolidation process that the council went through last year really accomplished a lot of what the middle housing bill aimed to do for jurisdictions of our size. So a minimum of 2 units per lot must be permitted in all residential zones. And then 4 units per lot if one of those units is affordable. And the developer property owner has to assure that that affordable unit is maintained as affordable for a minimum of 50 years. So that's accomplished through a covenant attached to the property and the title to ensure that that stays affordable for a minimum of 50 years. Some of the other provisions specific to the middle housing said that jurisdictions can only apply administrative design review and have to treat middle housing as they would a single family lot. So currently in our codes, we require anything over 2 or 3, I believe, to have site plan review approval. So for those low density, or those affordable units that are over 4, the only thing we could really apply is administrative design review and a building permit process. So it does require that we treat these lots like single family homes. So potentially any regulations we have related to buffering of what would be considered a multifamily unit to existing single family units would have to be removed from the code, and these would be permitted just as a single family house would do. There's also some changes to parking that would be that we would have to look at right now. Single family residential is 2 spaces per residential lot. In addition to like duplexes, they would have to provide 2 spaces per residential lot. For lots below 6,000 square feet, the maximum parking you could require is 1 space per unit. And on lots smaller than, I'm sorry, I have that wrong, still 2 spaces per, it's per lot, not unit. And smaller is 1 space per lot or per unit on that lot.
So that's a reduction in required parking. Is that right?
It is,
So the
especially
legislation
for-
shrinks how much parking is required to build
Exactly.
units now. Okay.
Exactly. The next, I will just say that the locations in Lacey where this would be most likely to have impacts is going to be in our older Lacey, our older developed areas, because most of our new residential development is very dense. This doesn't change requirements for things like lot development coverage, or setbacks, like residential setbacks. So really where you may see impact of this is going to be in like Brentwood neighborhoods and some of the older neighborhoods in downtown or the older Lacey areas, original Lacey. The next bill that also affects infill and most likely in some of those older neighborhoods of the city that, and then those that don't have covenants to prevent this, was Bill 1337, and this relates to accessory dwelling units. This would change how the city regulates accessory dwelling units. Right now, our regulations permit 1 accessory dwelling unit per single family lot, in addition to the single family home. What this one does is requires that jurisdictions permit at least 2 ADUs per single family lot and increase the allowable square footage. Right now, the city's regulation is 850 square feet or the half the size of the main unit, whichever is less. This increases that allowance to at least 1,000 square feet. And then it also permits, like I said, at least 1 more ADU per lot that can be up to 1,000 square feet if the lot would permit it. So you could have a detached ADU on a lot. You could incorporate an ADU into an existing dwelling unit. You could have a duplex on a lot as well as an accessory dwelling unit, all to accommodate additional infill and affordable housing. There's also and we don't have this anyway in Lacey, but jurisdictions can't require that ADUs and main units be owner occupied. And it also permits condominiumizing of ADUs if the property owner wants to sell that ADU as an airspace condo. This bill, along with the middle housing bill, these go into effect 6 months after the next periodic update of the comprehensive plan. So these are things that'll be reviewed with our next comp plan update and then incorporated into the development regulations
Quick question.
after that,
The 1,000 square feet, is that for each ADU or is that
Yeah.
total?
per each ADU.
For each, so they could
Yep.
have 2,000 square
They
foot
could.
ADUs,
Yep.
regardless of the size. So there's no longer that restriction of half the size.
That's
of the main- Okay.
That's correct. And that was something in our design guidelines that we incorporated the last time we did our ADU update, probably 2010, maybe.
I would just think that
Earlier
most
than that.
lots couldn't accommodate that, could they?
Probably
I mean,
not.
If you have a single family lot, to have 2 additional 1,000 square foot structures seems like, just doesn't seem like that would work very well.
At least not in urban growth areas, but these also apply to there's also some allowance for ADUs out in the rural areas as well,
Okay.
out in the
Where it would
unincorporated
make more
counties.
sense. out
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
okay.
So it'd be very liberal, but you still have your site constraints that are going
Yes.
to dictate what can actually be built within the neighborhood. And you still have the complementary design standards too, to make sure it's compatible.
Yep, yep. The other thing too, new covenants, new developments, you can't put in place or adopt new covenants that would restrict ADUs. Existing covenants that are in place currently, also could likely prohibit this from having a large impact in some of the neighborhoods.
So in the HOAs and things, they, okay.
Going forward, you can't include it, but existing
Right,
ones are essentially grandfathered.
Yeah, most of the newer HOAs, there's just, I mean, I look at, Horizon Point where I live, you couldn't fit 1,000
No.
square foot building.
No,
on
exactly.
Any lot in there.
Exactly.
Unless you made it part of the garage or conversion, of the existing footprint, but even
It's
then.
really pretty tough to fit 1,000 square feet
Yes.
onto any of those lots.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, yeah, 1,000 square feet.
So whoops, the next bill, whoops, why is that? Is Bill 1042, and this bill is in regards to the use of existing buildings. And it doesn't necessarily change, well, a little bit it does, but what this says is that in commercial and mixed use zones, cities must permit housing to be permitted in existing buildings without any requirements for traffic impact analysis or SEPA checklist to be submitted with the application, or land use applications for that matter. So say there's a existing office building in Woodland Square Loop in Lacey Midtown, if the developer can make that work, they'd be allowed to permit residential units in that zone, and up to 50% more residential units in that building than would be permitted in the underlying zone. So just an act to help accommodate changes or additional housing development. The other thing that this does is it says that existing buildings, you can't require developers to bring existing buildings up to current development standards, like for landscaping or parking or, buffering or any other development regulations that might apply to other developments, simply because they are converting it to housing. So
it exempts it out of local land use permits, and this goes right into a commercial remodel building permit process.
I think it can, yes.
Robin?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just wanted to understand what that means. It seems as though it's removing a barrier, right? That perhaps if you wanted to build residential units in a vacant space in a commercial building, a barrier might have been, well, we're going to have to satisfy all the new higher requirements for the SEPA and the, improving the landscaping and the setbacks and all that. And now you don't necessarily have to do that. So it's sort of like allowing the legacy requirements that existed when that original building was built and still letting people install residential units.
That's correct. There are, if additional commercial is added to the building, like ground floor commercial with residential above, the bill does still allow for jurisdictions to add parking requirements if they're necessary, if there's not enough on the site. But the residential particularly is not supposed to impact any changes for parking, or is not supposed to address parking changes or design. If we have design elements, design requirements for exteriors of buildings. Right now in the Lacey Midtown, our Woodland District Design Code has permitting thresholds, and if you exceed permit dollar thresholds, the whole site has to come up to standards with Lacey, with that zoning code chapter, and this would allow the project to move forward without having to meet some of those standards.
And I think the important thing to remember too, these are statewide standards now, and so all buildings are different, and their capabilities to be converted are different as well.
Right.
So I think of some of the older stock of office buildings, those type of things, maybe built pre-70s, have a lot higher chance of being converted to residential than say some of the office buildings that were built in the 80s and 90s for state office purposes, because that's when you start getting into these real wide footprints, and they're very difficult to reconfigure to provide for adequate unit sizes in relationship to hallways and plumbing and then all those different pieces tied to it.
I remember it not, sometime in the last few years, a developer looking at thinking about doing that in one of the buildings in Midtown.
Well,
And it was gonna be more expensive than tearing the building down and starting
right.
over.
When Ryan led the Woodland District Strategic Plan, we did a performa where we hired an economist to go in and
That's
assess
what
those
it was,
existing
okay.
buildings, 3 different types of different buildings, and all of them found that it
It
was
wasn't cost
well,
effective.
it wasn't cost effective, and then some of them weren't even feasible just because of their footprint. Because if you think about the offices, they have a community restroom on a floor and a big floor plate. But to break that up into individual units, you didn't have the dimensions that made sense for hallways and units and mechanical and all that type of stuff. And then you gotta, change your elevator structure, those type of things.
And we probably don't have any other area in the city where there's any buildings this would really apply to. Really, Midtowns were,
I think maybe along Pacific Avenue
Yeah,
or some of those
right.
existing, commercial
Oh,
We're
okay.
gonna
kind of
get 1 to
older
2 units,
places
3
that,
units,
yeah,
those type of
yeah,
things.
some of those
Okay.
smaller things. And that does definitely, I think, would remove some permit barriers to
Good.
redeveloping those into housing. Do you want housing or do you want commercial? But-
yeah.
Yeah, Ryan led the effort and got that study. We still have that information, even though it's dated now, but it still gives a good perspective of what type of building stock we have with the Woodland Square Loop and potentials.
What about residential safety requirements particularly for older buildings, such as fire suppression and that sort of thing? Would those still be required?
You do still have to meet the life safety requirements of the codes. One of the things that you wouldn't have to do is some of the new energy code requirements, but still the life safety stuff you would have to, just not some of the new stuff we're gonna see in the energy code that's gonna be in place in October now, I think.
Okay, thanks.
So the next bill, just to briefly touch on, is 5258, and this is related to condominiums and townhouses. And it was, the purpose for it is to encourage the construction of condominiums and houses sold as a condominium in recognition of the fact that condos and townhouses have historically been a way to an entry into the housing market for a lot of new home buyers. What this bill does is try to encourage the development of those. And over the last several years, we've seen a reduction in the construction of condominiums. And the main reason for that reduction in the construction is because of liability associated with condo construction, especially long-term. And what this bill does is provides a new process to affect construction defect claims. So prior to this bill, a condo association or owner could take a developer almost immediately to court over a liability and construction defect claim, and that claim can put them into court proceedings for years and years, which can affect their ability to continue projects, existing projects or new projects. And so what this does is it introduces a project or a process that allows or that requires property owners go through essentially a mediation phase prior to going directly to litigation. So the condo association submits to the developer report that says these are the problems, and then the developer can then address those, review that report, and then address those problems prior to going to litigation. So it allows a mid-step in between to potentially allow that developer to continue construction and not go into that long litigious process. The other thing that this does is offers a down payment assistance program for first-time buyers through the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. And then it does also limit impact fees on development. So it requires that cities look at impact fee schedules to ensure that the impact fees reflect the proportionate impact of smaller units to address overall impact fees and reduce those impact fees, making the construction more affordable for developers. We do have a couple condo projects ongoing right now in the city up in the Meridian campus area. This actually is an image of one of them. It's Campus Reserve or Campus Springs out in Meridian campus, and they're 3-story townhouse units. They're going to be sold as condos. Their square footage range from 600 and 800, so pretty compact development out in Meridian campus.
Good, we need, that's some housing stock we definitely need, some
Yeah.
smaller housing stock like that.
The next is permit review timelines, and what this does is it modifies land use permit review timelines. And this goes into effect January 1, 2025, so it will probably need to be addressed in maybe next year's development guidelines. And essentially what this does is they don't substantially change our existing timelines, and I don't think that we really have issues meeting our land use development review timelines, but it does provide 20 business days for determination of completeness, 45 days for permits that don't require public notice, 70 days for permits that do require public notice, and then 120 days for permits that require public notice and a public hearing. The one thing that this does to encourage jurisdictions to meet those timelines, if you don't meet those timelines, you start getting penalized in terms of refunds of permit fees.
This might have a bigger effect on the county, I'm thinking. than it will on
Probably,
us, huh?
yes, yes.
Just saying.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah.
It's taken us 2 years to get permits for radio towers.
So this is, and it's specific to land use permits, and it could be argued civil drawings as well. It doesn't affect building permits at this time.
Well, it's still the conditional use permit page, fine.
So it would, yeah. You can still, jurisdictions can still stop clocks for the need of additional information, but you have to make sure that you're really documenting the need and making sure that the applicant knows why you're stopping the clock.
Can't take 10 months before you look at it.
Exactly, that's exactly right.
Cool.
5412 is a bill that's aimed at reducing permit workloads, and what this does is it expands the SEPA infill development categorical exemption to include all housing developments. Right now, our categorical exemptions for SEPA are short plats, so 9 lots or fewer, and multifamily housing up to 60 units. So those don't require a SEPA checklist to be submitted with their land use application. This becomes effective after September 30th of 2025. Again, I don't think this really is going to have any impact. It's aimed at reducing permit workloads, and I think mostly for the jurisdictions that require a separate SEPA process. We incorporate SEPA into our development process, into our initial land use review process anyway, so it's a combined review. It's not something separate that is added to a timeline for a land use application. So not a big impact on the city of Lacey. Finally, we've reached the climate change and resilience. This is that third bullet I talked about. And 1181 actually revised RCW 3670A, which is the Growth Management Act. And this bill amends it to address climate change and resiliency. The transportation goal has been revised to address greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled. There's a goal for open space and recreation that has been changed to say we must strive to retain green space and fish and wildlife habitat. And then citizen participation goals have been revised to encourage the participation of vulnerable populations specifically. A new goal has also been added regarding the issue of climate change that we'll have to add to our comp plan. And then the bill also adds a requirement for a climate change and resiliency comp plan element with 2 sub-elements specific to greenhouse gas emissions and resiliency, which includes a natural hazards mitigation plan be added to our comp plan. So the Department of Commerce is putting together guidance for this, and that guidance is supposed to be out, preliminary guidance is supposed to be out in December of this year. And then final guidance of 2025 and the 2023 guidance is what we would use for our next update, which is going to take place next year.
So this will be included for next year?
For our next comp plan update, yep. And finally, just a few other things, other legislation of interest, the Shoreline Management Act 1544. All this does is change the review timeline for shoreline management acts from 8 years to 10 years. So our next shoreline master program will be updated now in 2030 instead of 2028. 1425 addresses municipal annexations, which is designed to encourage annexations for all cities rather than just those of certain populations. And what this allows is a sales and use tax above other authorized taxes, which can be used. And this would be able to be used by jurisdictions to maintain operational services or municipal services in the annexation area. And then the Manufactured Home Landlord Tenant Act, the Planning Commission has really been looking at manufactured homes as affordable housing options lately. And this Manufactured Home Landlord Tenant Act adds some protections for residents of manufactured home parks that own their unit, but they don't own the land. It allows them an opportunity for a right of first refusal if the property owner of the underlying land decides to sell the property.
Councilor Vasquez has a question.
Okay.
So for second substitute House Bill 1425, the municipal annexations, it allows us to add an additional tax to maintain services when we annex new land. We've done costing in the past, just projecting the additional revenue that would be received if we annex particular parts of our UGA, and then how much providing services or bringing those places up to standards would cost. And I'm thinking of Tanglewild as an example, because we do have costing. We have a couple of reports that were produced over several years indicating that although tax revenue would increase if we included some of those into the city, the level of services that would need to be provided would also be, it would be more expensive to provide services to that area than it wouldn't pay for itself. Would it make sense for us to, with this new legislation, do some costing to see if that is still the case?
It is. It is. And,
Rick's already done the costing. Okay.
well, and it's also, again, I want to refer back to, it's on the council work program, 3-year work program, with the culmination of that anticipated in 2025, which aligns
Right.
with the comp plan updates and helping establish that annexation strategy.
But this will be a part of it, right? This new
This will be a
legislation
part of
that
it,
gives us
because-
some additional options.
Yeah, because there's some, it's at first blush, it looks like, hey, this is a great revenue. It's not new tax revenue. It's a share of the state collected
Right.
sales tax revenue. And depending on how the size of the annexation, if it's between a population of 2,500 to 10,000, I think it's 1/10 of 1% of the sales tax state share. And if it's above 10,000 in population, then it's 2/10. And so taking that Tanglewild Thompson Place area, we'd go back and relook at what we did previously, update that analysis. We probably need to go out and get some help to take a look at it in context of this bill provision, because we still want to be strategic about it. But also that increase in sales tax revenue or that state share, there's also a caveat that it can only be spent within the area being annexed. So we have to identify what are those services that are the increased services
Earmarked.
for us for that particular area, identify what that portion of state share of sales tax we would need and to justify, and then on an annual basis for 10 years, provide reports that we're actually experiencing those costs of services. So we'd have to have an annual reporting process as well.
So we have to prove to the state that we're spending the money they're giving us back in that place that we annexed with a report.
And so part of that actually we have to do in conjunction with the county, because again, we have to have a development agreement with the county in order to qualify. And so we want to make sure there's no cost impact, negative cost impact to the city or a drop in level of service, but also for the same with the county. So there's quite a bit of conversation that have to occur after we have the opportunity to update those studies and bring in this new bill as a strategy as part of that study.
We move in the right direction, but it doesn't solve all our problems.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sounds like a lot of administrative burden to get there too.
Okay, so that is what I have to share with you all today. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to. Any other questions?
I understand, it looks like overall, we're in a pretty good place on most of it. It doesn't seem like it's gonna be that significant amount of changes for Lacey, right? Because we were pretty much ahead of the curve on a lot of this stuff
I
already.
agree. I think that we're in pretty
Yeah.
good shape, but
Their permitting processes, their long-range planning programs have always been proactive. So they're kind of, again, like you said, ahead of the curve. And so these are things that are catching up, but they're statewide initiatives because not every place in the state operates the same or has the same dynamics. And so it's kind of, some of those things are resolving some of those worst case issues that bubble up through those various legislative districts.
Yeah.
We are set to take advantage of actually maybe implementing some of these things sooner rather than later. Most of them are tied to our next comp plan update, but there's we have maybe some capacity and resources available to be able to implement some of the stuff sooner rather than later. So things like potentially the additional ADU, you know, that kind of stuff, the number of units on a lot, those kinds of things we may be looking at pushing forward, and those might be in front of me by the end of this year.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So of the changes, what do you all think would be the ones that would have the most impact on Lacey in terms of change or other?
You know, the planning commission asked a similar question, Councilmember Cox, which is, you know, what are some of the, you know, what are some of the dynamics related to, you know, housing specifically? The question was about, like, do we have enough utility capacity to be able to handle the additional residential units that might be developed as a result of some of this new legislation? And really what it comes down to is a matter of economics, and a lot, even, you know, as the city's worked really hard to essentially, you know, incentivize and try to get a broad sector of housing developed, it still comes down to a matter of economics. And, you know, is somebody going to buy a house and demolish it and turn it into, you know, a development with additional units? Well, a lot of times that existing house is worth more standing than it is to tear it down and build those additional units, especially given our high cost of construction and high cost of labor in our area and those kinds of things. There's additional things above and beyond what the city and or the state can control that are out, you know, a little bit out of our control that still are pushing the economics of the whole situation. And so I don't really see this affecting too much. I mean, we can certainly get ahead of it as much as we can with the legislation, very similar to the, you know, our pre-approved ADU program. You know, we have a program that takes away just about every barrier possible, but still people aren't, you know, we're still hearing, okay, it's still expensive to build these. It's still, you know, so, you know, we can do as much as we can. There's still those things that are a little bit out of our control that would be a little bit more of a barrier than that.
What I would kind of hope to see, we have so many apartment projects being developed, and apartment projects and condo development really take the same process, and our apartments are built the same way that condos are. And I would hope that that law might remove that liability barrier so that maybe we could get more condos rather than tons of apartments and increase in home ownership.
That could be a big deal. Because that, I mean, in business that I'm in the insurance business, and mostly we insure apartments and condo associations. That's what our company does. And it's been a huge problem in Washington, not locally as much, but even in Seattle.
Yeah.
They haven't built condos in years and the liability has been the issue. They've been building apartments instead because there was less risk.
Yep. Yeah.
But allowing people to own homes means that, like, that's how generational wealth is created, right? Like, that is how a family can gain financial stability in home ownership.
And so with that, you know, it'd be incremental, it'd be slow change. There's nothing that's going to change overnight with, you know, but, you know, as Sarah mentioned, with the condo, it's not only new construction of condos, but we have a whole suite of multifamily are coming online, trying to facilitate that conversion condos. We used to in the early 2000s and late 90s had a lot of older apartments where that original investment by the developer was recouped after, you know, between 7, 10, 15 years. And then they decide we want to liquidate. And one of the options to liquidate instead of selling to another investor was to condo and convert that process. And so hopefully that will bring that back into the market as well, because we do have quite a bit of multifamily stock being constructed. You know, you look at the stuff that's coming on around our lakes, on the Hicks Lake, we have a couple of projects, Martin Way Corridor. There's some potential there long-term that we can kind of get a little bit more of that buying power into the market.
I'm curious, is that apartments to condo conversion something that the city can incentivize or support? Do we already do that?
I think the biggest challenge is we'd have to be careful how we try to incentivize it, that we're actually truly getting that value. I think the bigger barrier is the condo liability law. It'd be interesting to see what this new legislation has an effect on it. Because it does talk about the mediation process, but there's still that, I believe that provision in there that there's not a time period where I can't change the term, but basically a period of time where all of a sudden you cannot bring
I think it's actually 6 years.
is it 6 years now?
6
It used to be
years, yeah.
open-ended, that anybody can bring a claim for the life of the building.
Yeah.
And that long-term liability issue was a problem. So if they shorten that,
Statute of limitation.
thank you, that's the term I was looking for. So,
You know, the multifamily tax exemption program does, it's only applicable in the Woodland district or Midtown at this point, but it does have, it does allow, talk about condo or conversions. And that could be an incentive to use for people to convert if there is, affordable housing.
so it's definitely something to continue to monitor and try to promote, and then we'll update our regulations and plans accordingly.
Alrighty, great.
Thank
Sarah, do you have anything else for us on this?
I don't, thank you.
Okay, great. We ready to move on to the energy efficiency rebate update?
All right.
Grant will be leading the conversation on this topic.
Yep,
Okay,
I'm gonna pinch hit and Ryan jump in if I start misstating anything.
great.
Lindsay and Hans have been working on this program for quite a while now, and we're ready to go live, but for getting the final contract with PSE. So what the program does is, for any Lacey resident, it'll match any applicable rebate from Puget Sound Energy, basically doubling the rebate that you get for energy efficiency upgrades up to the cost of the project. And what I'm going to do is kind of share the draft web page. This is not live yet. That kind of describes the program and how to apply and what the rebates are. So,
Grant, is it all one application process? They don't have to go through a separate process for the city, correct?
that's correct. Yeah, and what PSE will manage the rebates and then bill us for the Lacey portion.
Great.
All right, so this is the draft web page, and I know Hans did a lot of work on the mapping tool here to make sure people are able to find whether they're eligible or not for the Lacey part of it. And then this is the city's portion of the applicable rebates. So this matches the PSE rebate. So this is what the city would be potentially paying up to 100% of the cost. And let's see. Yeah, the efficiency boost incentive is, I believe, income based. Is that right, Ryan?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the standard incentive is available to anybody.
So it would just essentially be doubling. So for example, Grant, do you want to go
Yep.
down to appliances? I think appliances are probably the
Yep.
the common one. So for example, a standard single family home doing a front load clothes washer, $75 would be their standard Puget Sound Energy rebate. So it would be doubled if they were a resident for a total of $150.
Awesome.
So for, I don't know, we bought a washer a year or two ago. It was probably $500-600. So, you're thinking $150 off that. That's a good amount. Taking off that washer, and same for a dryer, but a little less.
The water heater, tankless water heater, $250, is that what it says? So you get $500?
Yeah, tankless are still pretty expensive. So a tankless is,
$1,000.
no, that's probably a standard water
Oh,
heater.
okay.
Yeah.
That. So that's the gas storage water heater there, $50. A tankless is going to be the on-demand water heater. So those are still a little bit more expensive.
It's still a $500 rebate on, that's pretty
Yep.
significant. And what was the other column then? So what, the one that was the bigger rebates, that was
Based
income
on
based?
income, correct.
And then the last column is manufactured homes.
Below 90% AMI, that's the to qualify.
Okay, so it's pretty
Pretty high.
broad still, point, I mean, below 90% is still a pretty significant number of people. And we're doubling that as well.
Correct.
Yes. Yep. So we've got contractor kind of hints and referrals on here as well. And then links to PSE and the rebates page itself where you would apply. So again, as Councilmember Greenstein mentioned, it's a one-stop shop. You don't have to submit separate applications. It all goes through PSE. They automatically apply the Lacey portion of that if it's applicable, and then would bill us for that, I believe, on a monthly basis. So where we're at is we're ready to go and anxious to go. We're still waiting. We've got the master service agreement with PSE, which is fairly meaningless. It's just a contract without any scope. We're waiting for PSE to get us the final scope so we can actually package that up together and get it approved. And once that happens, we're ready to hit the go switch.
So next step is once we get the that scope out of PSC in the final format, we look at it, make sure it fits what our needs are, then we'll bring it right to council for asking council to authorize a signature of the contract. And then once that happens, we'll be ready to launch next day and do a promotional effort too, to make sure we get make that with public affairs. So when we do go live, we're also doing a media push to get it out there.
What, I mean, I know we're waiting for PSE, but what are you thinking timeline wise? When do you think we'll be live?
I thought we'd be live 6 months ago.
Oh, okay.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
since
Oh, so
process.
our part's been ready for that long?
Our part has been ready for would you say, Brian, about a month now?
Yeah.
The details and everything. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So what, is there a specific holdup do we know of, or?
Puget Sound Energy,
Yep.
yeah, it's a big organization that
Yep.
has bureaucracy associated with it. So it's been navigating that. That's been a little bit of the challenge.
Okay, wow. Okay, we can't be the first city, I mean, are we the first city to do something like this?
These are some programs that there's similar programs up in the Bellevue, the east side of King County areas, for different types of scales, but the first down's, I think south of King
Well, the
County.
reason I'm asking is because you would think that if PSC's done it before, it shouldn't take so long to do it,
But
but
I think the structure's set up a little different. We
Okay.
wanted to make sure that it was one-stop shop. We wanted to
Okay.
make sure that we weren't having to issue a check too, and then all of a sudden it's like PSC issues a rebate, and then all of a sudden the customer gets something 3 months later from us, and wondering what it's for.
Yep.
Or trying to miss filling things out. And so we're really working on how we can just embed it into the PSC program instead of having a side-by-side.
Gotcha.
I think
Okay.
the stuff up north is more of a side-by-side process. And they
Yeah.
have one
So we
structure
are
for-
doing it differently.
I was gonna mention one thing additional, which is this is the money coming out of this for the program is coming out of the council's annual budget for climate initiatives. So that's where the pot of money does come from.
Mhm.
That's already in the budget. One of the things we'll have to do is monitor how much
Yeah.
demand there is so that we're not exhausting the amount of budget that we've dedicated for climate actions this year. We also have last year's that we can use as
There'll
well.
be some carryover from last year's
Yeah.
climate action implementation. And then, of course, that's a $200,000 annual budget item. So again, we're gonna see how the success of this program and see what that yearly cycle is. And then also then what can we do with the additional funds if we have other funds remaining, what other programs we can implement.
I think this is
And-
great. I like, we've talked about before, I like things where we're using the carrot rather than the stick. I like incentivizing people to do what we want them to do. So I think this is great.
Brian, thank you. You answered one of my questions. I have one for Grant. Is the list on your slide, the total list of the projects that will offer rebates for, or are there
Yeah.
more?
That's I believe comprehensive for the
Oh.
PSC programs.
So if somebody wanted to put in a new heat pump, for example, we can't help them with that.
Not currently, but as you know, that's one of the things we'll be looking at next year as
Okay.
part of the climate mitigation implementation.
Right.
As Olympia's pioneered a program that helps pay for that, working with a organization, and they're looking to expand into some of the other jurisdictions. So we'll be
Right.
definitely having that conversation.
Looking that way. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Another piece of this too is trying to figure out, because there's a lot of Reinvest in America Act dollars
Yeah.
that go into energy efficiency. So how do we create a information for the public to be able to easily find those
Yeah.
rebates for those type of programs too? So there's one thing to do at the local level, but they're also maybe leveraging a lot of federal dollars that will come through to be able to tackle those things versus having our local dollars.
Yep.
applied to it.
That's music to my ears, Rick. It was one of the points I made at the retreat on Saturday is, I think part of our role is trying to help the public know what the opportunities are and help them access them.
Yep.
So this is
Yeah,
great.
they're never easy to find. So I think anything we can do to help the public find those would be huge.
Agreed. Well, this is exciting, and I hope this will come on board sooner than later.
We're ready.
Yay, Grant. Is there anything else for us on that one, Grant?
No.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order from city manager or staff? Council? Okay. Well, why don't we call this meeting adjourned? Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.